"You're a burden, Mason. Always have been." That was the last thing my brother said to me before he closed the door and locked it. I stood there, suitcase in hand. The porch light buzzed overhead like it was struggling to stay alive. Not broken, just flickering, like it couldn't decide if I was worth lighting up for. My name is Mason Burke. I'm 38 years old. I used to be a structural engineer in Detroit. I used to design bridges, restore cathedrals, sign drawings with confidence. Used to have a fiancée, a house with a yellow front door, a future I could see clearly, until one phone call changed everything. Budget cuts, they said. We're letting go of mid-level management. Mid-level, that's what I was to them. A line item, an expense. Emily, she didn't wait, didn't even let me explain. She packed her bags. Before I even got home that night, left a note on the counter. I can't be the only adult in this relationship. No conversation, no goodbye, just gone. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there, staring at the empty hallway where her suitcase used to sit. Then I called Paul, my brother. He said I could stay with him, just for a while, until I figured things out. His wife, Dana, wasn't thrilled. She never said it outright, but every clink of her spoon in the morning felt like a judgment. Weeks turned into months. Job interviews turned into silence, and the world kept turning, without me in it. They said I was overqualified, or not the right fit. But I knew what they meant. Your name was in that lawsuit, even if you weren't to blame. And then one night, it happened. Paul came home late, didn't even take off his coat. He stood by the door, looked at me on the couch, and said it. "You're a burden, Mason. Always have been." He didn't yell, didn't argue. He just said it like it was a weather forecast, then turned away and closed the door to his room. The next morning, I packed, didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note. I took my suitcase, my portfolio dusty and ignored, and walked out into the January cold. I walked until the city lights got quieter, until my legs forgot what they were doing, until the anger in my chest turned into something colder. I found myself near the edge of the old rail yard. There was a station there, abandoned since the 70s, graffiti on brick, beams cracked with age, but it was still standing. Like me, I sat there for hours, didn't sleep, didn't think, just breathed and let the silence settle in. That's when I met Clarence. He ran the scrapyard, 2 blocks down. He was the kind of man who didn't smile much, but his eyes were steady, not judging, just seeing. He found me tinkering with a broken trolley cart behind the station one morning. "You fix that?" I nodded. He tossed me a pair of gloves. "Come back tomorrow, 6 a.m. That was it. No questions, no pity, just work. The next morning, I showed up, didn't say much. He didn't either, but he kept giving me things to fix, bolts to tighten, tools to organize, and somehow, without meaning to, I stayed. I swept the floors, organized rusted bolts by size, repaired a dozen frames no one cared about. But I did, because every screw I tightened felt like a piece of myself, clicking back into place. Clarence didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. That was the unspoken agreement. One day, he pointed to a shed in the back. "Roof leaks, floors warped, make it yours." So I did. I cleaned, reinforced, rebuilt, piece by piece, bolt by bolt. It became mine. Not just the space, but the rhythm, the silence. And at night, I drew sketches, blueprints, fantasies. None of them would be built. I just needed to remember that I could still create. But one night, I drew something different. A bridge. Simple, curved, honest. Not one to cross rivers. Just space. Just air. I showed Clarence. He looked once, grunted. "Why not build it?" I laughed. "With what?" "Hope and duct tape." He smirked. "This place is made of junk. Find what you need." So I did. I gathered old steel beams, bent railings, discarded fencing, and I built it right behind the scrapyard. Called it the Broken Bridge. It didn't go anywhere, but it stood, and kids came, neighbors came. They took photos, doodled their names in chalk. One kid wrote, "This saved my summer." And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Then the reporter showed up, local paper. Asked questions. "What's your name?" I paused, then said, "Mason Burke." Just someone trying again. The article came out a week later. Fallen engineer rebuilds from scrap. And just like that, people started calling. City council, a nonprofit, even the local school. Everyone wanted help, building something. And one day, "So did Paul," he called, voice shaky. "Business failed. Dana gone. I need help," he said. "You're the only one left." I didn't answer right away. I walked out, sat on the broken bridge, watched the sun dip below the rusted edges of a yard. Then I picked up my phone and said, "You're not a burden, Paul, but I won't be one again either." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't explain. I just let the silence do the talking. That night, I pulled out a blank sheet and began to sketch a new bridge, one that might actually go somewhere this time, not just across land, but across everything I had lost. That's the day I stopped surviving and started building again. The next few weeks passed, without ceremony, without noise, just dust and wood and quiet purpose. I didn't talk about the article, didn't mention the calls I started getting, just wrote names down in a notebook and kept working. Clarence watched me closely. He never asked, but he knew something had shifted. "You gonna charge him?" He asked one day, nodding toward the notebook. I shrugged. "I just want to build again." He didn't smile, but he looked at me, proud, almost, "You've got the hands for it." He muttered, "Now let's see if you got the backbone." I didn't answer, but I started keeping invoices, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the dignity of being paid for what I knew how to do. One afternoon, I stayed behind after Clarence left. It was raining, the kind that seeps into the bones, the kind that makes silence feel heavier. I pulled out my old leather sketchbook, the one from back when I was still wearing ties, and signing blueprints that would end up in city archives. I flipped through the pages, most of them faded now, some smudged by water, one stained with coffee. From a meeting I barely remembered, I found a drawing, a spiral staircase wrapped in glass. My last design, before the layoffs, before the collapse. I traced the pencil marks with my thumb and felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Grief, not just for the job, not for Emily, not for Paul, but for the version of me that believed effort guaranteed outcome, that believed loyalty would be returned, that believed family meant something more than blood. I closed the book, set it on the workbench, and opened a new page, a frame, no stairs, no walls, just an open space, no purpose. Yet, but I'd find one. The next day, a woman named Rachel stopped by the yard. She was short, hair tucked behind one ear, wore overalls and old boots, with laces fraying at the edges. "I read about the bridge," she said. "I run a grief support group downtown. We lost our space during COVID, but I was thinking maybe you could help." "Help how?" I asked. "Build us something. Doesn't have to be fancy. Just a place to meet, to sit, to remember." I looked at her hands. She was holding a photo of a teenage boy wearing a graduation robe. Her son. She didn't need to say anything else. "Give me 2 weeks," I said softly. The group met on Thursdays. So I built it, behind the old shed, using pallet wood, and recovered planks from abandoned projects. I didn't draw up plans, just listen to the space. Let it guide me. It wasn't beautiful, wasn't symmetrical, but it felt honest. Benches faced each other, a circle, so no one had to speak without being seen. When Rachel returned, she sat on one of the benches and cried without saying a word. She handed me the photo of her son. "Can you carve his name into the center beam?" She whispered. I did, letter by letter, slow, precise, like each stroke with permission to breathe again. When the support group met there the following week, I didn't stay, but I listened from behind the shed. They laughed, they wept, they held each other without explanation, and for a moment, I forgot I had ever been unwanted, forgot I had ever slept on the cold floor of a shed with no one expecting me to wake up. I went back to the shop and began rebuilding my old drafting table. Clarence came in, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "You remember who you are yet?" he asked. I paused, looked down at my hands, then back at him. "I think I'm remembering who I want to be." He nodded once. That was enough. That week, I got another letter. No return address, just my name, written in a shaky hand. Inside, a check, $300, and a note for the bench. I never got to say thank you, but it helped. It helped more than you know. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the broken bridge. It creaked under my feet, like it was learning to hold me, all over again. I sat there until the moon dipped low and the air turned silver. Then I whispered, "I forgive you." I wasn't sure who I was talking to. Maybe Paul, maybe Emily, maybe the version of me who let himself believe he was worthless. But the words left my mouth and didn't come back. That was enough. Until the next morning, when he came back. It was raining, not a downpour, not the kind that screams, just that steady, relentless kind that whispers its way into your bones. I was restocking metal sheets in the back. The shop smelled like warm varnish and wet soil from boots. That's when I heard the door. The chime barely rang, like even it didn't want to announce what was coming. I didn't rush. Rain brought all kinds. Loose table legs, retired men with stories to trade for coffee. But when I stepped into the front room, I stopped cold. He was standing there. Paul, my brother, the man who once said, "You're a burden, Mason." Now, he looked like someone had taken an eraser to the outlines of who he used to be. His suit, once tailored, proud, hung loose on him. His shoes, muddy, tired, sunk just a little into the wooden floor, like even gravity was finished holding him up. He didn't speak, just looked around the shop, at the workbenches, the hand-carved signs, the subtle scent of cedar and effort. "You built all this?" His voice cracked, more gravel than iron. "Yes." His eyes lingered on the business license behind me, Weller Woodworks. He squinted. "Why not Birkin Brother?" I stared at him, then said, slow, deliberate, "There never was a brother." He flinched, only a little, but enough. Then came the words he thought would fix it all. I made a mistake. I didn't reply. Let the silence do what years of yelling never could. He stepped forward, tried to speak, stopped, then began again. I didn't know how to be a father to failure. He was staring at the floor, his shoes soaking, his voice a ghost. "I thought cutting you off would make you fight harder, would force you to find your strength. You thought abandonment was a lesson?" I asked, not angry, just tired. "I thought pain would wake you up." He said like it was an apology. "It wasn't." "It did," I said, "but not the way you hoped." His shoulders sagged. Years of pride unraveling, like a loose thread in an old suit. "My business is gone. They're auditing everything. Dana left." His voice broke slightly. "I can't even afford rent anymore. Your mother's staying with her sister. And me, I'm alone." Then he looked up, met my eyes, and said, "You're the only one left. Not, 'I'm sorry.' Not, 'I miss you.' Not, 'I was wrong.' Just, you're what's left when everything else burns." I took a breath. stepped aside, not to let him in, but to point to the door. "I'm not your son, Paul. Not anymore." He blinked, stunned. "But you survived. I was wrong about you." "No," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "You were right. I failed, over and over. But you mistook failure for finality. And I didn't survive because of you. I survived in spite of you." His face collapsed inwards, like the last support beam. Finally gave out. "I have nowhere else to go." He whispered. I looked at him, really looked, and said, "Then I suggest you learn how to build something out of nothing." He stood there, dripping, small, silent. I didn't yell, didn't slam the door, didn't cry. I just walked behind the counter, picked up a towel, and tossed it toward his feet. For the floor, I said. He didn't bend to pick it up. Eventually, he turned and walked back into the rain. I watched him go through the fog window pane. His figure faded into the gray, and I felt nothing. Not revenge, not relief, not triumph, just a clean, cold clarity of a boundary held. I didn't go back to the house for closure. I went because I needed to see it fall apart with my own eyes. It had been 5 years since I last stood on that porch. Back then, I was a black garbage bag and a line of ink that read, "You are not welcome." Now, there was no sign, no warning, just silence. The grass was knee-high, uneven, brittle, one shutter missing, another dangling by a hinge. The door creaked open, without resistance. The house had given up pretending. It was still a home. I stepped inside. The air smelled like dust and bitter coffee. Every step felt like walking on the past. With bare feet, family portraits still hung on the walls. But something was off. Frames tilted, empty spaces, where photos had been taken down, paint faded, where memories used to hang. Then she appeared. My mother. She stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing a robe that used to be white, face smaller, eyes hollowed out by quiet shame. She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. I didn't come here to talk. She nodded, didn't speak again. I walked through the rooms, one by one, like tracing a crime scene, in reverse. The dining table, gone, replaced by a plastic folding chair, and an empty wine glass. The fridge had a magnet that said, "We are blessed." I stared at it for a long, long time. Then finally, I opened the door to my old room. Still had my name scratched on the bottom from when I was 13, and thought claiming space could keep you safe. Inside, the bed was stripped, the shelves empty, but tucked behind the ledge, my old ruler, splintered, forgotten, still here. I took it, left everything else, downstairs. My mother was by the door now. She looked at me like someone trying to remember a dream they weren't proud of. "He still talks about you," she whispered. I stared back. "He still calls it love when it's control." She looked down, didn't argue. "We were scared," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "You were selfish. Scared means staying up at night to make sure your child doesn't drown. Selfish means locking the door and throwing away the key, wrapped in guilt." She winced, but I wasn't angry. I was done. At the door, I paused. "Do you ever think about what you could have built?" She looked up. "You could have built something honest with me, but you chose obedience instead." And then I left. The air outside felt heavy, but not in a punishing way, more like a body, finally exhaling after holding its breath too long. That night, I placed the old ruler above my workbench, not as a keepsake, not out of nostalgia, but as proof that something cracked, warped, splintered, could still be used to measure something new. The shop felt warmer after that, not physically, but in presence. Every screw I turned, every beam I lifted felt lighter somehow. Not because they changed, but because I had. The next few months weren't glamorous. They weren't explosive. They were steady, steady like breath, like rain tapping on tin, like someone finally walking their own rhythm. After years of chasing someone else's footsteps, the requests kept coming in, not for fancy architecture, not for city hall grandeur, but for benches, reading nooks, children's toy boxes, repairing a creaky floorboard in a widow's porch. One morning, I was delivering a bookshelf to a woman named Clara, mid-60s. Kind eyes, hands that looked like they used to braid hair, but hadn't touched softness in years. When I set the piece down, she ran her hand across the top. "Slow, this reminds me of home," she said, "before things broke." I nodded, but her words, they stayed. Before things broke. That afternoon, I opened the floorboard. Under my bench, the old photo, still wrapped in cloth. I stared at it, not out of longing, not out of hate, but out of curiosity. I wanted to know, was the smile in that picture ever real? Was there ever a version of my family that wasn't pretending? I unwrapped it slowly, and that's when I saw it. Not the smiles, not the beach in the background, but my father's hand on my shoulder, tight, too tight, knuckles white. And suddenly, I didn't see a memory. I saw a warning, a frame of control, his grip, even back then, telling me who I was allowed to be. I rewrapped the photo, but this time, I didn't put it back. I placed it in the drawer next to my measuring tape. Let it sit there, not as a burden, but as a boundary. That week, a letter came from the local trade board. They wanted to feature me in their quarterly write-up. Young artisan makes a name from sawdust. I read it once, then filed it away. Didn't reply because I wasn't interested in being anyone's story. I was too busy building my own. One morning, I walked past Emilio's station. He was one of my apprentices. Quiet kid, 19, eyes like someone who had lived more than he should have for his age. He was sanding something small, something I hadn't assigned. I leaned over and saw it, a child's coffin, unfinished, pine, delicate. I didn't ask. He didn't explain. But the look in his eyes told me everything. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go home." I said, "I'll take care of this one." That night, I stayed late, sanded every edge, like it was sacred, polished the wood until my fingers ached. No carvings, no ornaments, no distractions, just grain, just strength, just truth. When I delivered it, the mother didn't say much. She just cried into my shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making it feel like he mattered." I nodded, didn't speak. Back at the shop, I looked at my hands. The same hands. My father once said, "We're only good for wasting time." But those hands, they had just built peace for a stranger. And one day, maybe soon, they'd build something more. Something I hadn't let myself imagine in years. Because lately, the wind was starting to shift. And somewhere in the distance, I could already hear the sound of something collapsing. The phone call came just before closing. A woman, cheerful voice, too cheerful. "Hi, Mr. Burke. We're doing a feature on small businesses that rebuild from the ground up. You've been recommended a lot." I stayed silent. She kept going. "Your shop has a reputation. People say your work feels honest. We'd love to get a photo of you out front. Talk about your journey. Maybe even mention your family background." "No," I said. There was a pause. "Sorry, no, which part?" "No photos, no story, and leave the family out of it. This business isn't about where I came from. It's about where I ended up." I hung up quietly, then looked around the shop. The saw hum of tools winding down. Sunlight catching dust in the air, like gold suspended in silence. That night, I didn't build anything, didn't sand, didn't stain. I just sat in the corner, by the drawer. I pulled out the photo. One last time, edges worn, cloth faded. I stared at the image. A boy pretending to belong, pretending his father's hand was gentle, pretending his mother's smile meant love instead of submission. And then, without drama, without fanfare, I dropped it into the burn pan, lit the match, watched the corners curl, the colors warp, the lies dissolve. No tears, no music swelling in the background, just a soft crackle of paper, becoming ash. And for the first time in years, there was space to breathe. The next morning, I built something, not for a client, not for money, not for charity, but for them, for the people who threw me away. A bench, wide, low, nothing ornate, made from reclaimed barnwood, scarred, weathered, strong, across the back rail. I carved one line, built from what you threw away. I didn't sign it. I didn't even leave a note. I delivered it myself. Their apartment complex was smaller than I imagined. No gate, no concierge, just a buzzer that no one answered. I carried the bench up to the third floor, set it down outside their door, and walked away. No knock, no explanation, no performance. Let them sit on it every day. Let them wonder, was this mercy or was it a mirror? Back at the shop, Emilio looked up from his station. "You okay, boss?" I nodded, just dropped off a delivery. Then I looked around, at the light spilling through the windows, at the scent of fresh stain, at two of the neighborhood kids, giggling as they tested their first dovetail joint. And I realized something. They made me into this, but they don't get to claim it. When I opened the new shop, there was no ribbon cutting, no press release, no father in a suit, pretending he believed in me all along. Just a sunrise, sliding across the wood grain of my front door. Just the wind, not rushing me. I bought the land with cash. No loans, no partners. Just years of quiet work and a heart that had learned how to hold its shape under pressure. The new space wasn't bigger, just quieter, tucked at the edge of a town, where people said thank you and meant it, where crickets hummed at night instead of sirens. I built every beam myself, drove every nail, not because I had to, but because I could. I no longer ran from the past. I just didn't give it room. In my present, kids from the neighborhood started hanging around, some curious, some just bored, a few with that same hollowed-out look I used to see in the mirror. I let them stay, gave them scraps of pine, old chisels, a place to make something that couldn't be taken away. One boy, Ken, reminded me of myself at 15. Quiet, sharp, wary. One Saturday, he carved a small box. On the lid, one word, enough. He didn't explain. I didn't ask. That's the thing about building with your hands. It says, what your voice can't. People talk about revenge like it's a moment, a storm, a reckoning. But it's not. Real revenge is waking up one day and realizing you don't think about them anymore, that their voices don't echo in your choices, that you build a life so steady their absence feels like peace. A year after I opened a new shop, a tree sprouted outside the window. Oak! From a seed that must have landed in just the right place. I didn't plant it, didn't trim it, didn't label it. I just watched it grow. Sometimes letters still come from my mother, apologies dressed in spiritual metaphors, words like healing and growth, without ever saying, sorry. I read them. I don't reply. My father never wrote. That silence used to ache. Now, it just means the line's been drawn. The ruler still hangs on my wall, splintered, warped, but useful, not as a reminder of pain, but of this, even broken things can measure progress. On the 1-year anniversary, I took the day off, packed a lunch, hiked into the hills, behind the town, sat beneath a tree, whose name I didn't know, ate slowly, listened to the breeze, the quiet, and without needing to prove anything to anyone, I whispered, "I'm not broken anymore." The wind didn't answer. It didn't need to.